Tonight's shiur Leilu Nishmat Avi Mari Dober Meir Ben Reuven Halevi Ini Merati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And this Shabbat we have the privilege of completing Sefer Vayikra. We're going to read two parshiot, Behar and Bechulatai, with which we conclude Sefer Vayikra. And the primary topics of Behar and Bechulatai deal with Eretz Yisrael, our connection to Eretz Yisrael. And that's not what we're going to speak about tonight. We're going to speak about something entirely different, sort of a topic that appears very, very at the end. It talks about all sorts of things that we aren't really noheg today. We don't really have today because it deals with karbanot, which unfortunately we don't have. But I felt it's a good opportunity to give us an exposure to some of the nuances of the halacha, nuances of Torah law that we don't often interact with and don't often deal with. So without any further ado, we will go right to the end of the parsha. And we're going to focus, as I said, primarily on one very interesting, I think, very interesting topic. It's one of the more interesting topics in Kodeshim, in dealing with karbanot. And it starts off basically with few short psukim. We'll start off, this is in Parak Chav Zayin, really the end of Bechulatai, after the section we read, which is called the Tochacha, which basically is all of the things that will happen to Am Yisrael if we are not faithful to the Torah. It's a whole litany of things that we really would not like to see happen to Am Yisrael. But Hashem tells us this is what happens when we don't understand that our connection to Eretz Yisrael is a conditional connection. It's conditioned on our keeping the Torah. And if we don't, there are consequences. Okay, having said all that, we're going to, as I said, we're at the end of Parak Chav Zayin. And Parak Chav Zayin begins with telling us the laws of Arachim, that if a person wants to donate a certain other person's value to the Beit HaMikdash, their erech, their worth, there's a fixed amount. And then it tells us about animals, donating an animal to the Beit HaMikdash. And the pasuk begins with the following: Ve'ima behema asher yakrivu mimenu karban laHashem. If I take an animal that is eligible to be brought as a karban, to be brought on the mizbeach as a karban, Kol asher yitei mimenu laHashem yiyeh kodesh. Whatever I set aside is to be set aside as kodesh, and it is to be brought as a karban. In other words, there is no ability. We are not allowed to take an animal that is able to be brought as an offering and say, I only want to give its monetary value to the Beit HaMikdash. You either give that animal or you find some other way to express the money you would like to give. Unlike any other thing, I'm allowed to take any object that I want, any object, my house, my field, my crops, all of these things the Torah is going to tell us you can dedicate their value to the Beit HaMikdash. Some of them have a fixed value, some of them have a value. The Kohen has to get an appraiser and appraise it, and that's how much you give to the Beit HaMikdash. Generally, those types of contributions are given to what is called the Bedek Habayit Fund, the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash Fund, rather than the Karbanot Fund. These are two entirely separate funds, actually numerous different funds, because there are all sorts of different Karbanot funds. You can have all sorts of Karbanot that you can give and donate toward. But if it's an animal that is able to be offered as a karban, you're not allowed to say, I want to give its value to the Beit HaMikdash. By giving it, you have sanctified it, the actual animal, to be brought as a karban. Once you have done that, Torah continues, Lo yachlifenu, you are not allowed to exchange it for anything. V'lo yamir oto, and you're not, actually, there's a slight difference. Yachlifenu means to trade it. Yamir oto means to exchange it. Tov bara, you're not allowed to say, well, this is, I thought this, I didn't really mean to give an animal that was worth $1,000. I really wanted to give only the $800 animal. Not allowed to exchange it once you've set it aside. Oh, rabito, or even if it's a bad one, oh, this is not the good one I want to give, I want to give something better, still not allowed to exchange it. You can always make a monetary contribution to either to be used for the korbanot fund, these are set aside for this type of korban, or to one of the korbanot funds, or you could set aside for the Bedek Habayit fund. I want this to go to the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash. Okay? So both of those are allowable, but once you've taken an animal that is able to be offered as a korban, we're talking about a cow, a sheep, a cow or bull, a sheep, or a goat, basically. Okay, it does not apply to bird offerings, even though we do bring birds. The whole laws of that we're talking about here do not apply to bird offerings, and we're going to see that as we go through tonight's shiur why and how that works. But interesting enough, now we're told you're not allowed to do it. There is a definite negative commandment, not allowed to do it. Okay, so one would think that if I did it anyway, it would have no legal impact. In other words, if I tried to do whatever this exchange is, it would not be legally doable because it's transgressing a negative commandment. Not only, so the point is, when I transgress this commandment by doing it, it carries a punishment that you, just like any other negative commandment for which no specific punishment is given of, you get malkot, you get literally 39 lashings, or up to 39 lashings, depending on how strong you are physically. But if you have done this and you've been warned and there are witnesses that you did it, you get this punishment. But nonetheless, interestingly enough, if I try to exchange one animal for another, not only does the original animal maintain its kedusha, the new one that you tried to exchange for it also becomes kodesh. So this concept is called Temurah. There's a whole Masechta in the Talmud that deals only with the detailed specifics of this specific halacha. Now, interestingly enough, that is if the animal is an animal that is offerable. V'im kol behema temeah, but if it's a behema temeah, behema that's not acceptable, asher lo yakriv mimenu karban l'Hashem, that is not offerable in the Beit HaMikdash, then v'minat habehema lifnei hakohen, then the animal is brought to the Kohen. He has to evaluate it. He does an appraisal of the animal, and exactly whatever he appraises it, you give that much money. So there are two types of animals here. One is an animal that is offerable. The other is an animal that's not. If it's not offerable, it's the equivalent of giving its value, its monetary value, to the Beit HaMikdash. Now, then it says, finally, but if you want to redeem it, if the owner wants to redeem it, the owner says, I want to give the value of this cow, okay, to the Beit HaMikdash, can't. You have to bring the cow as an offering. But I want to give this cow, if the cow, by the way, has a mum, before I want to dedicate it, it has a physical defect that prohibits it being brought on the Mizbeach. Okay, that's, by the way, what Rashi could say. Behema Tameya, I would have thought, oh, it's a donkey, it's a horse, it's something else. That's not what it means, because a donkey or a horse, I can't sanctify the Beit HaMikdash. If I do, I'm ordered. There's no evaluation by a Kohen. It's evaluated by an appraiser who just says, okay, here's what it's worth, and that's what you wanted to donate. As if I had donated my car, my ring, my safer collection, my stamp collection, whatever it was I donated, I'm not donating it, I'm donating its value. Same thing if you donate an animal that is not suitable for being brought on the Mizbeach, you're not really donating the animal. So what is Behema Tameah? And Rashi is going to tell us based on the Gemara, what it means is an animal that has a mum, an animal that's normally its species could be brought, but this specific animal, this specific goat, this specific sheep, this specific bull has some defect that means it cannot be brought on the Mizbeach. It's missing a limb, it's whatever, it's a treifa, whatever it might be, it cannot be brought on the Mizbeach, and therefore I'm donating the money. And we're going to see that in that case, the laws of Temurah do not apply. The laws of Temurah only apply if there was a point in time where the animal was offerable on the Mizbeach. So, for example, if I dedicate an animal as an offering, and then it develops this mum, then it gets in an accident and loses a leg, whatever it might be, then it is eligible for Temurah because it was sanctified before the defect happened. It is sanctified when I say it's sanctified. In other words, when okay, you're transporting a cow to be brought as an offering on the Beit Hamikdash, and something happens that causes it to be no longer offerable. The question is, when I left home, did I verbally say this animal is sanctified? Then it is sanctified at the time I verbally make that declaration. If you were thinking about it, oh my God, some accident may happen on the way there, you wait till you get to Beit HaMikdash, the animal is still whole, now you sanctify it. But if you didn't realize that, I'll sanctify it now. I want this animal to be brought as and it develops a blemish, something that causes it to no longer be offerable on the Beit HaMikdash, then you have to redeem it, take the money, buy a new animal, and bring that animal. And that is what Kol Yigolenu is. If no, you can't because okay. It depends on what you said when you set aside the animal. Did I say I want to bring this animal, or I want to bring an animal? And now you take that animal, and I'm saying this is the animal that I'm going to bring. Okay. In each of these things, there are all sorts of differences, but whether you bring the animal or the money, in either case, you could bring the money. You know, if the animal has a defect in it, okay, that happened after you sanctified it. Okay, in other words, I was walking one day among my herd, and I saw this really nice, beautiful animal, and I said, I want to take this animal and bring it as our korban because it's so beautiful, and I want to give it to Hashem as a thank you to Hashem for giving me everything I got. Okay, I take the animal, I mark it, set it aside so it doesn't get mixed up with everything else. But now I'm responsible to get that to the Beit HaMikdash. Somehow I didn't do. I waited a day or two. It had an accident. Something happened to it. I now have to redeem that and take that money and either bring it to the Beit HaMikdash or take that money, buy another animal, and bring that other animal to the Beit HaMikdash. I have that option. Once it is no longer suitable, this specific animal, then I have the choice of either redeeming it for taking the money and doing it. Now, there's another procedure here where I took an animal, I brought it to the Kohen to evaluate. The Kohen evaluated it because it's not an offerable animal because it has this defect in it. And I now want to redeem that animal and say, I'll take it back home. I have to add the Asaf Chamishito Alarkecha. Just we should know that there is a procedure to redeem an animal once it's become no longer fit for use on the Mizbeach. That's called redeeming it, and that's a whole different procedure than what we're trying to do here with the exchange. We're going to try to understand what the difference is and why one is okay and the other is not okay. Okay, interestingly enough, we have this law of Temurah repeated a second time at the further down in our parsha in the pasuk that tells us the following: Chomasar bakar vatzon. When it comes to taking your tithe of your bulls and cows and your sheep, or sown, by the way, sheep and goats, all of the animals that come under the rod, the 10th one becomes sanctified. This is the law of Maaser Behemah, that I have to take a tithe of all, not of all my whole flock, but of all the flock that's been born since the last time I took tithe, which is usually done on a fiscal year basis. Normally it's done the fiscal year, again, is machloket in the Mishnah, where the fiscal year for animals ends in the beginning of Elul or the beginning of Tishrei. But whenever that fiscal year ends, you take all the animals that were born during that fiscal year, you line them up single file, and each type differently. You do all the sheep separately from the goats, separately from the cows. I'm not a shepherd, but I understand that you can tell the difference between the size of the ones that have been born in the last year and the ones that are older than that. You'll know. You, the shepherd, knows which ones are which. No, it's over anything that's been born the whole year. Okay, and because of the way that sheep breeders work, I don't know. I'm just knowing this based on what I've read in the parshonim about how sheep breeders work. Sheep are generally are in heat during certain times of the year. they generally all are born within the same, month or so. And that's why the fiscal year is set up so that it's not during a period where you're going to be having one born one day and one born the next day. They're all going to be born in, in generally similar times. You take them all, you line them up, and you cause them to go through a single file passage, and you sit there and count 1, 2, 3. And when you hit 10, you have a Mara says it's a red stick. I don't know if it was a stick that had red paint on it, and you mark the 10th one. Okay, the 10th one, whether it's a good one, whether it's a bad one, whether it's got something wrong with it or not, it becomes sanctified automatically when it hits number 10. And again, the Torah tells us a very, very similar pasuk to what we had above. Lo yivaker, he should not inspect it, bein tov l'ra, to see whether it's a good one or a bad one. He also shouldn't try to line them up in advance by mentally counting, I'll make this 10th one the one that I'm going to throw out anyway, or vice versa. I'll make the 10th one the one that I was going to give anyway because it's so beautiful. Not allowed to do that. You got to let the sheep come through this, walking through this passage at whatever rate they want to come. But below Yimi Renu, and also, again, you're not allowed, once it's come through and been marked as number 10, you're not allowed to change it. Bimamer Yimi Renu, and again, if you try to change it, it stays within its sanctity, and the one you've tried to exchange for it gets elevated to its sanctity. Lo yigael, it can no longer be redeemed. So, okay, now the oral law tells us that these two parshiot, because they both say both of them are really they're the laws that apply to one apply to the other, the laws that apply to the second one apply to the first. So that these two are really one group of laws, and we're going to see in a minute that there are a lot of different nuances to this law of Temurah. We're going to go through the Torah Tamima, who's going to quote a whole series of Gemarot very briefly on all of the nuances that deal with this transaction. And I'm going to call it a transaction, this Temurah, which literally means exchange. Okay, so the Torah Tamima goes through the following. He says, firstly, lo yachlifenu b'shel acherim. Why does it say two different languages of lo yachlifenu? You're not allowed to chalif, chet lamet pei, the word chalifa. Is that tie? I don't know, because you tie it around. I don't know. But it's also oh no, chalifa is I'm sorry, it's a suit. Okay, I don't know. Again, but right, excuse me. But the word lamed pet in Hebrew is to switch something. So that's why chalifa is your jacket. You're putting on it. You're covering yourself. You become a different person, I guess. I don't know, when you put a suit and tie on, whatever. Okay, but chalipin, we talk about chalipin is an exchange. When I give you my pen and I say, okay, I'm using the pen as an exchange for everything that's included in this transaction. We have this kinyan chalipin. It's the same thing. So lachlif means to trade or to. Yes, you do a chalipin. You're saying you're taking possession of the pen in exchange for all of the stuff for the chametz that he's now your agent he's now your agent. Correct. Below yamir oto, you're not. What does it mean? Yamir oto, you're not allowed to trade it. B'shelatzmo. So what he's saying is, I shouldn't try to trade it off for somebody else or my own. So again, there's a whole aspect of when this Temurah becomes when it's viable that the other one becomes suitable it becomes also a kodesh is in these specific cases. Okay, now again, lo yamir. Wait a minute, hold on, we lost that. Okay, now lo yachlifenu. It says you shouldn't exchange it. Now here it's interesting. Hatzibur, an animal that is set aside as a communal offering. Bashutafim, an animal that is owned by more than one person, ein osim temurah. Such an animal it will not, if you try to do this, the second animal does not become kodesh. If it's a communal offering and you say, well, I want to switch this for this, then it doesn't work. It only works with an individual offering that's owned by an individual. Because it says, lo yachlifenu v'lo yamir. Yachid oset temurah, and a carbon that is owned by an individual can you can do this transaction, and the second one becomes kodesh. But a tzibur or partnership on animal owned by partners cannot become, because it isn't so wholly owned by one person. Again, because of the whole concept here of lo yamir. Temurah zachalipin, as we said, lo yamir. Tanya, we learned the following. Now, another interesting halacha. We know that a goy is allowed to it's allowed to send a karban to be brought on his behalf. However, if a guy sends a karban, it does not, and somebody tries to now exchange that, the exchange not only doesn't it work, not only do you not get malchut for it, but it doesn't work. Why? Because it says in the beginning, Daber b'nei Yisrael, because it says this law of Temurah only applies to a Jew who is trying to take his karban and exchange it for something else. Okay, now we get to another interesting aspect of this law of Temurah. Ha'omer harezu takat chatat. Okay, if a person has to bring a karban chatat, they've set aside an animal. They've sent to somebody to set it aside, and this animal should be designated as a chatat. Or they had to bring a karban olah, and they said, "Here's a karban olah." If a person now says that I am going to exchange this animal that I'm standing next to for that animal that other person set aside for me for a chatat or an olah, lo amar klum. Again, the exchange doesn't work. You have to be standing at the animal. When you want to try to do the exchange, you have to know the specific animal you're talking about. So if he set it aside, if somebody else set aside that karban for you, but you don't know what that animal, which animal, specific animal it is, that doesn't work. You have to have the specific animal that you're trying to exchange it for. We're going to try to understand in a minute why all of these halachot are here and what they're all supposed to be teaching us. Now, here we go. Tov b'ra. Now, again, we talked about this concept of good for bad or bad for good, and what does that mean? Okay, Ezeu tov b'ra. What is trying to exchange a good animal for a bad animal? In other words, I want to take a better animal and give it to the sanctuary. I would think, hey, that's a great idea. Why don't you let us do it? The answer is Bali Mumim, Shekadim Hakdeshan et Mumam. This is talking about what is Ra, a Tov. What is a Tov? What is an animal that was good that now became Ra? An animal that I sanctified that then became disqualified through something that happened to the animal. This teaches us that I can take an animal that is not suitable for the Beit HaMikdash, and I can try to exchange it for one that is suitable, and it will be elevated and now become suitable, even though it's not suitable. Wait a minute, I can't bring this as an offering. So as I said, this is a very, very strange halacha, that I'm allowed to take a blemished, an animal that's not suitable for being brought on the mizbeach, and elevate it to be kodesh by trying to exchange it for something that is suitable. Okay, it's very strange halacha. And then tov b'ra, okay, I shouldn't exchange a good one for a bad one. Wait a minute. If I said I can't take one that's not suitable and exchange a suitable one for it, obviously, tov b'ra, why does it have to tell me that I can't exchange a non-suitable one for a suitable one? And why does it tell us that? Ella, something that is tov me'ikaro oset temurah, something that is originally suitable can have this law of temurah applied to it. Ra me'ikaro enos temurah, an animal that was originally unsuitable cannot make a temurah. And this is where we derive the kachim shekada mum kavua lekdesha. If I wanted to sanctify an animal that was already unsuitable, it doesn't work. Enosim Temurah. It cannot make another animal in its take the law of Temurah. So again, we see that there are all sorts of interesting halachot. Here's another one. Im is l'rabo that a woman, by the way, even though we talked about this being a man, the whole thing applies to a woman also. If a woman has set aside an animal to be brought as a karban and tries to switch it, same thing applies. And interestingly enough, Hamer Yamer, it is allowed to be done l'raboded hayoresh. If the person who originally set the karban aside passed away, and the animal has now been inherited by their inheritor, they can also make a Temurah out of this animal, okay, which normally is something that we would have assumed would not be applicable. Again, behema, as we said before, ofot and menachot ein osim Temurah. This is only applicable to animals, sheep, cows, goats, not to birds, not to meal offerings, even though we have case of you can't do a Temurah, shelo nemar ela behema. This is only applicable by an animal, the whole law of Temurah. Okay, now interestingly enough, this is another interesting one. Behema be behema. I can exchange an animal for an animal. So I would think, okay, here I have a sheep that I want to bring as a korban. I bring another sheep. The answer is no. I can bring another goat. I can bring another cow. Mikan shemimir min hatzon al habakar, min habakar al hatzon, min hakvasim al hoizim, min hoizim al hakvasim, min hazacharim al nekevot, min hanekevot al hazacharim. This law of Temurah is totally illogical. You would have thought, wait, if I know that I bring a korban olah and it has to be a male, korban olah can only be a male. Okay, so if I have a male sheep and he's a korban olah and I try to exchange him for a female, I would think, wait a minute, she's not eligible to be brought as a korban olah. So how could I exchange for her? The answer is yes, it works. She becomes elevated. She's not brought as a korban because she can't be, because an olah has to be zachar. Okay, what do? I now have to redeem her and take the money and use it for an olah. Okay, I have to wait till she has because she's not suitable. But nonetheless, I would have thought that, well, the law of Temurah, that she doesn't become, that animal, that female animal wouldn't become sanctified at all. The answer is yes, it is. So again, totally illogical, because if I had gone over that female animal and say, you're an olah, it wouldn't work. But by saying that you're a Temurah for this olah that I have, suddenly it becomes elevated to Kedusha. So that's why I say it's one of these very, very strange halachot that we don't study because we don't study Kadashim, coaching. Okay, here's another interesting one. Behema be behema. I can exchange one for two other ones. I can say, these two, I'm exchanging this for these two. Or I can take two that I've got and exchange it for one. One for 100 for one. And all of these work, even though they seem totally illogical that they should work. Okay. Another one, another halacha. V'lo behema be'ubarim. I cannot exchange a full animal for a fetus that's not yet born. I can't say, even though I might have said this animal's baby that's going to be born, when it's born, it should be sanctified as a korban. That, as long as it's not yet born, it can't make a Temurah. Can't make something else as an exchange. Okay, all of these interesting halachot. All right, Pesach. Let's skip this one because now we're getting a little bit more esoteric. Well, let's skip because I'm going. All right. One last one. This is a very one. V'hayahu temurato. The animal and the one I exchanged for it both become sanctified. That's the whole nuance of this halacha. But nonetheless, now wait a minute. Now I would think, okay, now they have the same level of sanctification. The answer is they don't. Why? Because they're different in one sense. Ein hatmura oset tmura. The one that I've now exchanged, it's now sanctified, same as the original one is. If I bring another one and try to exchange it for that, it doesn't work. It doesn't go to a third animal. Okay, it stops at two animals. Like an animal can make the first one. The original animal can make, we just said, can make 2, 3, 4, 100. But the second one, it stops there. It cannot become a Temurah for something else. And similarly, lo havlado said Temurah. An animal's if an animal was brought as is set aside as a korban, a pregnant animal, and then the baby is born, that baby cannot make a Temurah, because even though the baby is a korban, it's not the original korban. It's a derivative korban in and of itself, and therefore it cannot make a Temurah. Again, because the way the Torah writes the pasuk. Okay, so now we want to try to understand a little bit more about this halacha. So the first thing Rashi tells us, as we've already talked about, that tov bara doesn't mean a good-looking animal versus a good animal. It means tam bebalmum. Ra here means an animal that has some physical defect, therefore that it can't be offered. So I would have thought if the one that I selected, if I brought the selected animal as a korban, and it wasn't suitable, it came not suitable, I would think it should be able to be traded for another one. And the answer is yes, it is, but you have to go through the procedure in the correct way. But Rashi is telling us that Ra, when the parshiot says Tov Ra, it doesn't mean that one is weak or small and the scrawny and the other one is well formed. It means a balmum, a tam meaning an animal that's offerable, balmum meaning one that's not offerable. And then it says Ora B'to. I'm not allowed to exchange a good one for a bad one. I'm not allowed to exchange a bad one for a good one. The Cholshkein Tov B'Tov Rashi says, and also you shouldn't think, by the way, that you can exchange a good one for a good one or a bad one for a bad one. That's obvious, Rashi says. I don't know why it's obvious, but it is. To Rashi, it was obvious. We'll try to go to the parshiot and we'll say why. Now, Amek Davar, the Netziv says a little bit differently. He says, Lo Yachli Fenu, I shouldn't exchange it, B'ma'ot o b'davar acher. Okay, I'm not allowed to take an animal that is set aside to be a korban. I'm not allowed to redeem it. I'm not allowed to transfer its sanctity to anything else. Its sanctity, it is now sanctified, and as long as it remains suitable to be brought as a korban, I cannot exchange it. I can't do anything with it. That's what that's what lo yachli fenu means. I can't say, oh, wait a minute, I really didn't want to bring this animal. It's too late. Once you've said this animal is being brought as a korban, it's done. You can't, unless it becomes intrinsically unable to be brought. It develops some type of defect that causes it to not be able to be brought. Otherwise, I can't do it, whether it's monetarily, whether it's some other object of value, or in this case, another animal. And then lo yamir means behema bi behema. I can't switch it for another animal. As long as it retains its wholeness to be able to be brought on the Mizbeach, it's something that gets brought on the Mizbeach. Okay. The Vilna Gaon goes into a whole lot of detail on all of these things right now. But I wanted to add one thing that he adds here. Lo yachli fenu, I can't change it. V'lo yamir b'shalo. Okay, so he wants to ask. So remember, this whole halacha of Temurah, he wants to assumption only applies to an animal that is suitable to be brought as a korban, not to an animal that's not suitable as a korban that I have dedicated to the Beit HaMikdash fund. I might have thought this law of Temurah is so illogical. I might have thought it also applies to an animal not suitable for bringing on the Mizbeach, not suitable for offering, that I sanctified its value to the temple upkeep fund. Talmud Lomar Korban, because the verse says, if we go back to the beginning of the pasuk that we quoted at the beginning, it says, it's an animal that's suitable for being brought as a korban. That's the first requirement. If it's not suitable for being brought as a korban, then it cannot be eligible to have another animal become Temurah for it. And that's why an animal that's set aside for the temple upkeep fund, because it's not suitable to be brought on the Mizbeach, cannot become have another animal become a Temurah. Okay, that's what I wanted to quote from here. Let's move on to the Mizrahi. Okay, now Rashi said, it's obvious if I can't exchange a good one for a bad one or a bad one for a good one, then I can't exchange a good one for a good one. And the question is, what is this kal v'chomer? Why is that something that we would logically have inferred? So the Mizrahi wants to explain that the kal v'chomer, this is the logical inference. Uma tov shel chulin. If I take an animal that's suited for being brought as an offering, but it's not yet sanctified, it's chulin, it's still an ordinary animal. B'ra shel hektish. If I take that animal and I want to exchange it for an animal that is not suitable to be brought as a korban, but has, because it was originally was suitable, but now it's not suitable. It's called ma'ayle leila hektish. I am elevating. I'm now taking something that was not suitable, and I want to bring something that is suitable in its place. Lucky, in such a case, I have transgressed this negative commandment, and I get malkut. Tov b'tov or ra b'ra, boy, why would it have to tell me if I exchange a good? So even if I'm trying to better the position of the sanctuary, of the korban, by giving a better animal as a korban, I still transgress this negative prohibition. Then why does it have to tell me if I'm giving an equal one? It's obvious that I've transgressed the prohibition. Hakim Mefarish le Abaye b'para. That's how Abaye explains this whole pasuk in the Gemara of Temurah. Rava says slightly differently because we learn this whole concept of equal exchange, quote, equal exchange, where both are suitable for the being brought as karban, or both are not suitable. We learn this from the extra words of the pasuk, and because it says the word, because it could have said lo yamir betov bara or lo mirto bara. Why does it say tov bara or ra betov? All these extra words are to tell us that each of these things also apply in even in an equal exchange. Okay. Sif Chachamim tries to explain again Rashi. Kolomar shelo yitain tam she'eno shel hektish b'almum shel hektish. What is this transaction? I am going to take an ordinary animal that's suitable to be brought and try to exchange it for the one that is sanctified, but I can't bring. And I'd like to take this one that is non-sanctified and the one that is sanctified and replace its sanctity with the one that isn't. I would have thought that should be allowed. Now, where does Rashi get this idea? Where's the Gemara basically get the idea that we're talking about a defect in the animal? Why can't we just say, I'm trying to exchange a fat one for a skinny one? Why does Rashi, what forces Rashi to say, and the Gemara to say, that we're talking about an animal that has a defect rather than an animal that just isn't a nice animal? I want to bring a nicer one. The Yeshlomar, and the answer is because there's another pasuk that equates the word ra of a karban. What makes a karban ra bad? Any animal is suitable for karban is tov. What makes an animal that would be ordinarily suitable for a karban to be ra is if it has a mum, if it has some defect. And we see that because it says, in Parshat Re'eh, talking about karbanot, it says it connects the word ra by a karban to a defect in the karban, not to the fact that it's a scrawny animal. And that's why Rashi, and based on the Gemara here, says that this whole concept of tov bara, ra b'tov, is not talking about the quality of the animal other than its quality as being suitable for a karban. Okay. Now again, he tries to understand what the kal v'chomer is. My kol shekain, who's that? Why is this the fact that I can't exchange a good one for a bad one? Why does that mean I can't exchange a good for a good? I would have thought that there are two different cases. I'm exchanging an equivalent versus exchanging for better for worse or worse for better. My kolshke is that if I try to take an animal that's not good, also litain bagdish, I can't exchange that for a good one. Okay, if I take a scrawny one and I try, or a non-suitable one, and try to exchange for a suitable one, I understand that's something I shouldn't be allowed to do. Why would I have thought that if they're both of equal value, that this is forbidden? The Torah forbids me to exchange two of unequal value. Why can't I exchange ones of equal value? Why do I even need it to tell me I can't exchange a bad one for a good one? I've lost. My internet is dying. Okay, well, I'm going to just keep going anyway. I hope I haven't lost anybody out in Zoom land. It's resetting. Okay. Sorry to pull you people out in Zoom land. Whatever. Anyway. Okay. Why? But if they're both good, lo mashnu, I would have thought there's no prohibition. Why is there a problem? Okay. Lama farish Rashi kol shkein tov b'tov arabitov. Okay. So his answer is, what is this? What is the logical inference? Yesh lomar dachi perusha. This is the way we can explain the logical inference. So there's two aspects to this halacha. One is, do I get punished for transgressing the negative commandment? And secondly, does the second animal retain its sanctity? So I need to know that in one case, I need it to tell me that, yes, you have transgressed. Because if it tells me that when I try to exchange a bad one for a good one, I've transgressed, I can understand that logically. Oh, I'm trying to treat the sanctuary by substituting a cheaper animal or a less suitable animal. I should be punished. I I should be penalized for that, and I've transgressed the negative commandment. But if I'm trying to improve the condition of the korban I'm bringing, why should I have transgressed the negative commandment? I'm trying to do the Beit HaMikdash a favor by bringing a better korban. So I wouldn't have known that I transgressed it. And the other way around, if I only had one of these two psukim, I wouldn't know that the second one retains its holiness. I would say, okay, if I'm switching a bad one and I'm taking a good one in its place, okay, that one gets elevated in sanctity. But if I'm trying to bring a bad one here in the place of the good one, why would that be elevated in sanctity? So we need both to tell us both of these. And therefore, once it's told that both of these, the same thing applies to the equal exchange, because we're saying that it applies regardless of whether I'm trying to improve the position of the sanctuary or I'm trying to improve my own position. I need it in both of these cases to tell me that A, the sanctity falls on the second animal, and B, I have transgressed the prohibition in all of these cases. And that's why the Torah goes through all four of these, or Rashi goes through it, tells us that all of these apply. Okay, finally. Why? Why is that? That's exactly what we're trying to get to. What is the whole underpinning of this whole halacha? Why do we have this whole halacha, and what is it all about? So I don't have this on the screen, so I'm gonna read this from Rav Samson Rafal Hirsch, who goes into great length. I'm going to try to keep this very brief, though. If you really want, you can look it up in your Samson Rafal Hirsch. He has like 4 pages explaining why there is this whole halacha, at least one explanation of why this whole halacha exists. I'm going to try to distill it very briefly. Basically, what Rav Samson Rafal Hirsch is saying, the reason this exchange does not work is because I am trying to distance myself. I, the bringer of the offering, am trying to distance myself from the entire purpose of that I'm bringing the offering. By exchanging the animal, I am disconnecting myself from the animal. The purpose of bringing a korban is that I am supposed to take this animal that is being brought as a korban, and I'm supposed to visualize everything that happens to it as though it's happening to me. Okay, that's the whole purpose of a korban. Purpose of a korban is I am supposed to be contrite, and I'm supposed to be saying, wow, I have really screwed up my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I have to bring this korban to try to help me get back closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not because Hashem needs me to kill this animal. It's not because Hashem needs anything from me. I need, and really what should be happening to this korban, it's getting slaughtered, its blood is being sprinkled, it should really be happening to me. What Rav Hirsch is saying is that when I try to take another animal and substitute us, so I'm saying I'm taking this animal that is not sanctified, let it take the place of the animal that is sanctified. That's what I'm trying to say by Temurah. I'm saying take this animal that's not holy and let it take the place of this holy animal. Now, the holy animal is one I was connected to because I set it aside to represent me. I'm now cutting that connection. That's exactly what Rav Samson Rafal Hirsch says is why the Torah prohibits this whole exchange process when the animal is still suitable to be brought as on the Mizbeach. When the animal was originally, that's why when the animal had a defect before I sanctified it, then it cannot have this whole transaction place, because if I sanctified the animal and it wasn't suitable, I wasn't really sanctifying it to be brought as a korban in my stead. I was sanctifying it for its monetary value in the first place. That's why this whole procedure, this whole halakha does not apply. So the whole concept here is, and that's why, according to Rav Samson Rafal Hirsch, this is the chapter, by the way. If you read your parsha, the immediate psukim after this pasuk of Lo Yom Iyar is the end of Vayikra. So it really is through this concept of Temurah, it is reinforcing the whole process of the korbanot, which we started Sefer Vayikra with. That the purpose of the korbanot is not to think that I'm giving something away to Hashem that He needs a present, or I'm giving something to Hashem as something that He needs. The whole concept of korban is I need to be able to reestablish my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why, again, we're now closing out, coming full circle on Sefer Vayikra with this whole concept of Temurah, that if I try to take that behemoth that I've now said is going to represent me and move it out of place and try to bring something else in its place that I am now disconnected from, it doesn't work. That's what Rav Hirsch's perspective. Rabbeinu Bechaya has a much less subtle, much more straightforward one. Why am I not allowed to do this whole concept of trading? Very, very similar to the whole concept of I'm not allowed to add mitzvot and I'm not allowed to subtract mitzvot. Okay, he says, Lo hatam b'zeh. The reason we're not allowed to change, again, I would say, hey, if there was a bad one and I'm trying to put a good one in its place, it should definitely be allowed. Torah says, no, why? The Torah understands human nature. We know that Hashem has the Yetzer, given us the Yetzer Hara. A person who has taken a vow or he sanctified something, maybe he changed his mind. Okay? He's going to want to exchange the animal. I didn't really need to set aside such a beautiful animal. I'll take one that's a little less. Once I have sanctified it, the animal is sanctified. It's not its monetary value. And he realizes he can no longer redeem it. He'll try to switch it out for another one. Therefore, the Torah says, no exchanges. An animal that's suitable to be brought as a karban has to be brought as a karban. Once you've set it aside, it's set aside. That's it, period. Tov bara rabba tov. Doesn't matter whether it's good one for bad one for good one. If I allow you to take a bad one and substitute a good one for it, you'll say, I'm really switching a good one for this one, even though you know deep inside that it's not really a good one. And so that's really a very interesting comment, because this whole concept is really, but according to Rabbeinu Bechai, he's saying it's all based on Hashem knowing human nature, knows that we're always trying to, we may regret what we did, we'll change our mind, and therefore, it's not that it's not only is it a negative commandment, but it's a negative commandment that has a very significant consequence, and that's exactly what Rabbeinu Bechai ends with, if he does try to exchange it, the Torah now penalizes him, that it and the substitute both become sanctified. You not only don't gain anything, you lose another. Not you lose. You have to pay another. You lose it. You lose the value of another behemoth that you've tried to exchange it for. So it's very, as I said, it's one of these very, very strange halachot, because here in Torah says you can't do it, but if you do it, there's a consequence. I mean, normally the consequence is there's a punishment, but here the consequence is that what you've tried to do actually works. You've tried to elevate the sanctity of the second one, so it works to that extent. It doesn't work to the extent of removing that sanctity from the first one. And that's where this whole law seems to be a very, very counterintuitive halacha in all its nuances. And I hope that, as I said, as Hashem, we should merit to learn these halachot so that when Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt, soon we will be able to have a leg up on those who haven't yet studied these halachot. So I figured this was a difference from my normal thing, and I hope everybody learned something tonight. And I now open it up to questions, comments, and feedback. Good. Yeah, that's very simple. Maurice is saying once you made a commitment to give the korban, you can't go back on your word. I mean, it's again.
Like you not today now. Buy something.
Yes. Well, again, as I said, there are different levels of commitment. And again, you're right. I mean, if we go to the parsha of Nedarim, we find very simply it says when you make a commitment, your verbal commitment should be a verbal commitment. People are, that's why people always say, bli neder, I'll do this bli neder. And you have to say that because you're right. If you make a commitment, you've made a commitment. Don't make a commitment that you're not going to be able to fulfill. And that's one of the things. Good.
So you decided how much
sin you did. Don't say, oh, no, maybe it wasn't such a big sin. And don't say, no.
Well, remember, not every.
Just understand this was a sin and don't go overboard and don't try to.
Okay, that's an interesting. Although saying the fact is that once you've figured out what you want to bring, you've said this is, I think, what I need to restore to get atonement for what I've done. Go forward with it. Don't second guess yourself by trying to recalibrate it. So it's also a good comment. Well, this is one of the challenges of life, is to always to try to remember, once you make a decision, stick to it. Don't second guess yourself, because you'll second guess yourself so much that you can lose your sanity second guessing yourself. Shoulda, coulda, woulda, did. Okay. Yes, go ahead, Maurice. That's a whole different discussion for a different time. But yeah, the answer is very simply yes. Most carbon, when you bring the carbon, you are supposed to not just put your hands, you're supposed to press down on the animal with all your weight. That's one of the stages of bringing a carbon. However, there are all sorts of halachot and who has to, who doesn't, and that's a whole different discussion for a different time. Okay, any other questions, comments? Not, I say thank you all. Have a good evening. Thanks for joining, and